got a good group here. We'll continue with the lesson then. We should wrap it up today finally. This will be the last lesson, and then after this we'll probably next week we'll start the molecular relationship. And that's available for download in the file section on the keys and also on the molecular group. So everybody make sure they have a downloaded copy. If you have any problem, let me know and I'll make sure that you get one. Rule 15, let's review it one more time. The fires approach a shadow, yet burn it not. The fire sheath is completed. Let the magician chant the words that blend fire and water. Okay, the fires approach a shadow, yet burn it not. What does that mean? We've gone through this for several lessons. Have we figured out what this means yet?
Well, we're the shadow, the shadow, the reflection of the soul. The fires would be the cosmic fires of spirit, I would imagine, that permeate into the darkness of our being, and we're able to receive them.
Not only are we the shadow, but what else is the shadows?
Well, the soul is the shadow to the monad.
Oh, that's true. But here on physical reality, everything in the physical world is a shadow.
Okay. Everything, yeah.
And this rules of white magic is designed to teach the disciple how to take things from the spiritual world where there's ideas and concepts and principles, and to manifest them in the physical reality. And when they're manifested in the physical reality, they're symbolically called the shadow. It's a shadow of the divine idea, and the shadow is that which materializes here. Now we're on Rule 15, and in Rule 15, we finally get to the end product of the creation by the white magician, where things actually materialize in the physical reality. This is the end product of white magic, is to have the materialization happen. And the materialization is the shadows. Now he says, the fires approach the shadow, yet burn it not. What does it mean? The fires do not burn the shadow. What does that mean?
I don't know, something like the higher vibration, maybe mental fires or soul fires aren't burning up the outer forms because they're able to vibrate in the same resonance with them.
That's a true principle you're talking about, not quite directly related. Now, what happens when a white magician materializes something here on the planet? The fires approach a shadow and burn it. What happens is it creates a lot of disturbance in the force, so to speak. And it causes a lot of people to come and try to destroy it. There's a lot of forces. When something good materializes here upon the planet, there's forces arise that approach the shadow and try to destroy it. But he points out that when the white magician is successful, the shadow is created, the fires approach the shadow and cannot destroy it. Okay, so this is when the white magician is successful. He will make a creation that is not destroyed. Now, eventually, what usually happens is they get corrupted. The Christ was the greatest white magician, and they were unable to destroy the work that he initiated, but they did corrupt it. So we don't have it in its purity, but it wasn't destroyed. The fires approached the work that he initiated, and they were unable to destroy it. They put the apostles in jail, they killed the Christians, but they still could not destroy it. And so this is when the white magician is successful, is he makes a creation that cannot be destroyed. And fires are related to forces of mind. So the forces of mind approach the shadow, and some minds supported it, some minds resisted it, but they were unable to burn it or destroy it. Okay, the fire sheath is completed. In other words, all the fires are in place to sustain the shadow. So the shadow and the fires are in cooperation together. Then he says, let the magician chant the words that blend fire and water. Okay, what does that mean? What are the words that blend fire and water? And what does it mean to blend fire and water?
It'd be the consummation words that are said or spoken that a magician uses
Isn't
to
it to,
consummate his
isn't
work.
it to blend knowledge with emotions? Blend the fire and water, understanding with emotions.
Okay, that's headed the right direction. In other words, the magician's work is finally complete. He's created this wonderful idea. He's manifested here upon the earth. And to make it stable, he has to blend fire and water. And he has to chant the right words to blend fire and water. So once a work is here upon the earth, an idea is manifest that will help humanity. Fire and water must be blend. Now, water is symbolic of what?
Emotions.
Right, emotions. And fire is symbolic of what?
Mind.
Mind.
Spirit.
Okay. So that which is reasonable and logical and factual must be blended with emotion. Okay, emotion is often, that's a trouble with water or emotion. It is very illogical. Okay, so when a person just tries to create with emotion alone, the work will fall apart because there will be elements in it that don't make sense, that are not logical, that are not reasonable, and thus they cannot stand uh, to the the a period of time without falling apart. Okay, so the magician must blend fire and water. By blending fire and water, he takes that which is reasonable, which makes sense, and applies it to the emotion so it harmonizes with emotion. So the emotion goes along with what makes sense. And things that do not have the power to last, this does not happen. Fire and water is not blended. In other words, let's take something that doesn't make sense that Congress is doing, which is always borrowing money and trying to live on borrowed money. This feels good because, boy, we want to do these wonderful things with this borrowing all this money. Okay, the emotions say this. The mind says, well, we can only borrow so much and then we're going to be in big trouble. So we have to blend fire and water. We have to do these good things, but do them in such a way that we don't have to borrow from our grandkids. Okay, and so this is blending fire and water. We don't neglect doing the good things that we feel good about, but we do them in such a way that makes sense, that doesn't wind up doing us more harm than good. And this is the blending the fire and water.
The heart has been found to contain many neurons. That it actually has a miniature brain in the heart, and so you could be saying combining fire and water is connecting the neurons of the brain and heart together so they act as one supercomputer.
Yeah, that's interesting fact. And then he says, let the magician chant the words. In other words, the magician, the white magician is one that understands emotions and he understands minds and he understands how they can relate. So he has to look at what the people that are affected by the idea he's materializing, how they feel and how they think, and chant the words that will appeal to their minds and their hearts both, and their souls and their astral body. He chants the words that harmonizes and affects them all in a way that is positive. And this stabilizes the creation. So the creation will not be destroyed. And so that's the basic impact of Rule 15. Kind of
Wouldn't that
interesting.
be like the Declaration of Independence would have been the words that blended fire and water when our country was liberated from England? There were a lot of people that were up in the air about that liberation, but the logical step to take was to actually sever all ties. So would that have been some words that blended fire and water?
Yeah, that's a really good example. Maybe one of the best examples in history. The Declaration of Independence, written by Jefferson and added to by other members. Um, Very beautiful words
We
that
the people,
blended fire and water. They were logical, but they also appealed to the emotions and satisfied the emotions. But good point, Curtis.
On the other hand, is when Ronald Reagan stood in front of the Berlin Wall and he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." That was a very important use of the fire and emotions, and it did happen.
Yeah, that's another really good one. Yeah. Yeah, there are certain things magicians and the magician, remember, white magicians uh, are important people in history, have used the principles of white magic, from politicians to scientists to business people, have blended fire and water and produced things that have helped humanity. And so,
I don't know
yeah,
what words Nikola Tesla used, but he was a white magician. And he had to blend the emotional need for alternating current with the mind. And Edison did everything in his power to confront him and prove him wrong. But the minds of the people saw through Edison. And they saw that alternating current was the way of the future. Otherwise, we'd be operating on direct current. We'd all have little batteries in our houses.
yeah. Tesla was a great creator, but he lacked a little bit in blending fire and water. And that's why he was almost forgotten, and now he's being reinvented and rediscovered, because he didn't focus enough on doing that, whereas Edison actually focused more on blending fire and water. So his part as being a white magician actually created more finished uh, inventions than Tesla did, even though Tesla had the greater mind. You know, he didn't have the connection with the emotions that Edison did. Edison understood how people felt, and so he blended fire and water. That's why he became more famous and more successful. But he, on the other hand, Tesla had the stronger connection with pure spirit. And but
Well, Tesla's problem is he would take an idea only so far and he wouldn't complete it. Like the radio, you know, he discovered radio waves and he dropped the ball. Marconi picked it up, got credit for a long time. It's since been given back to Tesla. But Tesla saw, well, if we can do radio waves, why can't we do power waves? So he kind of dropped the ball on the radio and moved on without completing that particular invention.
This is a trouble with a lot of very highly evolved people. They're so connected with spirit, and they get so many ideas that they can't. They get one halfway finished, and they don't consummate it, and then they move on to something else.
Yeah.
He moved on
Right.
from one thing to another. He come up with a lot of really good stuff. But most of the things he came up with that we're using today, other people grabbed on and kind of finished off and blended fire and water.
Right. Like
And
Marconi.
yeah, that's true. So that's a problem a lot of people have. I've had that problem a lot in my life. I've had a lot of really what I consider to be great ideas, more ideas than I can develop. And I have learned in my older age I need to relax, focused on one thing at a time, uh, more than just having a shotgun effect, a lot of ideas thrown out there and see what sticks. When you do that, often nothing sticks. But if you focused on one thing at a time, and this is what Edison did over Tesla. He decided he wanted to make a light bulb, and so he really focused on it until he got that light bulb made and marketed and out there. And uh, Tesla would come up with stuff like wireless electricity, work on it a while, and then move on to something else before he really got it finished and secured blending the fire and water.
Edison tried 10,000 times to make a light bulb, and he said, it's not that I was a failure, I just proved one more way that doesn't work to make a light bulb."
Yeah, but when you look at the basic intelligence, it's interesting between Edison and Tesla. Tesla was a lot more intelligent than Edison, but Edison applied the principle of white magic of blending fire and water, which Tesla didn't. So Edison turned out to be more famous and more successful uh, than Tesla. So it's not always the most intelligent that succeeds. I found this when I was a salesman. I visited thousands of businesses selling signs and different things, and I was amazed at some of the people that were really successful business people. I found many of them weren't very bright, but they were kind of applied what I call the Forrest Gump principle. Now, Forrest Gump wasn't very bright, but you notice in the show that when he got something in his mind, he wouldn't let it go until he was successful. And and that illustrates a principle that I've seen with many business people I visited. Some of the really smart ones were not very successful. Some of the ones were just average intelligence or even below average intelligence that were just uh, determined and had one thing in their mind to make that business go, and they didn't have a whole bunch of side ideas that they're working on. They just had one main focus. These guys were often quite successful, even though they didn't appear very intelligent to me. But they were successful because they had a one-pointedness about them. And that's a key ingredient to success that many intelligent people just can't overlook. But the trouble with very intelligent people is they have all kinds of ideas coming to their mind, and so they're more tempted with distractions than the average guy with one idea he thinks is good. Okay, so sometimes the average guy will wind up being more successful than the really intelligent guy. And so intelligence is sometimes a detriment to success. Yeah, Curtis.
Yeah, Forrest Gump, he finally at the very end of the show ends up with a woman, Jenny.
Yeah.
And she resists all through the show. She goes in totally different directions. She's 60s and she's off gallivanting around with a lot of rainbow people and goes into the dark path. But he doesn't give up on her, and in the end she surrenders to him. So yeah, that's a good principle of the Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
And the Bubba Gump shrimp principle.
Yeah, it's really interesting to contemplate. Okay, we're going to go over some of the details he presents in the last few pages about aspiring disciples and consummating everything. He says the immediate goal for all aspiring disciples at this time can be seen as follows. First, he says, an achievement of clarity of thought as to their own personal and immediate problems, and primarily the problem as to their objective in service. This is to be done through meditation. Okay, primarily the disciple then needs to figure out, well, what is my objective in service? What do I really want to accomplish? What is my part of the plan? There's some big plan out there. And if we perceive 100 different ingredients and try to work on all 100 of them, then we won't be accomplishing anything. We need to pick out what our part is and try to do our part, and then we can be of use to the hierarchy. Second, he says the development of sensitivity to the new impulses which are flooding the world at this time. This is brought about through love, loving your neighbor, seeing the Christ within, and understanding. He says, love reveals. So he talked, this was written in 1934, and there was new impulses coming at that time. Now we're in 2020, and there's new impulses coming mainly because of this virus. So we want to ask, are we sensitive to the new impulses which are flooding the world at this time? Or are we just afraid and trying to hide from our neighbor and social distancing ourselves and wearing masks? Or are we focused on that? Or are we focused on, well, like Ed was saying, what's the meaning behind all this? What's the lesson that humanity needs to learn, and what part can I play? Okay. Third, he says, the rendering of service with complete impersonality. This is done by eliminating personal ambition and love of power. Yeah, complete impersonality, that's always difficult, and eliminating personal ambition, love of power. We see what we see playing out in the political world, not only in the United States, but all over the world, is there's a people are seeing this pandemic as an opportunity to grasp power, and there's forces out there that are trying to seize more power for themselves at our expense because of this virus that's plaguing the world. And then there are those that are concerned about this grasping for power. So we have these two forces, and let us hope that the forces of freedom win. We're going to have I think what we're going to see happen with this pandemic is this struggle between those who are seeking more power and those who want more freedom. And so we're having people trying to control everybody more, and other people saying, well, we don't need all these controls. Certain amount of control, fine, but there's a limit. So finding the limit, finding the middle way. Of course, there has to be a certain amount of control and a certain amount of order, a certain amount of laws, but everything must function within law in order to reach that midway point where there's balance between the two forces. Fourth, he says, pay attention to the soul over public opinion or past failures. Endeavor to dwell ever in the secret place of the Most High. That's an interesting phrase. He tells the disciples, dwell ever in the secret place of the Most High. So where is that at? Where is the secret place of the Most High?
It's in that upper room inside of your head.
Yeah, the third eye is a good place to look. The third eye is symbolically called the throne of God. So the throne of God is most likely the secret place of the Most High. And to pay attention to the soul over outward forces, he says public opinion. Public opinion, he talks about public opinion quite a bit too in a positive way, that this can be cultivated to make positive change. But on the other hand, the disciple isn't ruled by what other people think. He's ruled by what the impressions he gets from the inner self, from the soul. That must be his guiding light. And oftentimes, the inner impressions from the soul disagree with the outer world. And a lot of times, people give into the temptation to be popular, to not generate criticism, so they go against the soul with what everybody is saying that's out there. And so the disciple must ignore those outer forces and go by what he gets from his own soul, even if it's not popular, even if people will think you're crazy for believing it. Now, on the other hand, you don't. If you get something that disagrees with public opinion, you don't have to go out and generate a lot of ill will by broadcasting it. You, the disciple still has to be discreet about how he presents things, because oftentimes he may get a truth, like all of us here have certain truths that we couldn't go into regular Baptist church and tell people about it without raising a big storm there, okay? Without raising a big conflict. So the disciple has to be discreet and selective as to how he presents. But on the other hand, he must not let the outer forces dissuade him from believing and accepting what he gets from his own soul. Okay, if he does, then he starts to lose contact with the soul. And then he just becomes like an average person that's swayed by whatever the world tells him is true rather than what the soul tells him is true. So we must, once we get that inner voice giving us guidance, we must pay attention to it or lose it. Like they say, use it or lose it. So we must use the soul when we get those impressions. And when we use it, then we have more power to access the soul. He says the disciple must be ever aware of consequences if he is overpowered by glamour or his lower nature. So he must be aware that if he succumbs to these, if he ignores the soul, he must be aware of the consequences, that he can lose contact and he can take a path that will waste a lot of his time, maybe several lifetimes, if he doesn't pay attention. He says there are three main points of danger the disciple must deal with. First of all, he says physical health. We got to do everything possible to ensure our health remains good, because if our health doesn't remain good, if you wind up with a big health problem, then all of a sudden all your focus is put on that. Now, Jill just went through a big health scare. Now, when you were in the hospital and everything, I bet your focus was 100% on getting better, wasn't it, Jill?
You're muted there, Jill.
Yeah, we can't hear you yet.
Yes, it was that. But what also helped JJ was the fact that the other people around me were also focused on my well-being.
Yeah. Well, that's good that you had good support. That always helps. But yeah, I think all of us has been through some type of crisis one time or another. Even if you get a bad cold, if you get a bad cold, it's really hard to focus on spiritual work, service for humanity, because you're thinking of, well, I just got to get over this thing. And so anything that affects us physically is a big distraction. Now, the disciples many disciples have been able to negate that. So even though they have health problems, they're still able to stay focused and accomplish quite a bit. But it's a lot better if we don't have that big distraction, because it's a big temptation. And when it comes, the disciples with strong wills have to override it as much as they can and still focus on trying to accomplish good works in life.
Kennedy was an example of that.
Who's that?
Kennedy.
Yeah, right. He had a lot of physical problems that a lot of people aren't aware of, but he suffered a lot of ill health that but he had a strong will and he overrid it. So people just thought he was really healthy when he wasn't. Same thing with Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, they say his health wasn't that great, but he just ignored his problems.
Roosevelt was in a wheelchair.
Yeah, Roosevelt was incapacitated, so he couldn't even walk. So there's always problems, but he says it's really important the disciple focus on keeping himself healthy, because then he can focus all his attention on the work that he has to do to help humanity. It's a big benefit for the disciple to keep his body healthy. So we must focus on that and study what we can. Read some books about health, nutrition, energy. If you haven't read some good books on health and nutrition, well, read some and get a feel as to what to do to keep your body healthy. Okay. Second, he says, another danger for the disciple is being caught up in astral glamour and illusion. This can only be overcome through raising the consciousness up to the higher mind and soul. Even experienced workers get caught up in astral traps, and this creates a problem for his mission. So that those astral temptations are always there, and the more intense the disciples work together, the more they start to materialize. When we just talk about theory, it's easy to reach, a certain amount of harmony, but then when the theory starts to be applied, then there's all kinds of astral traps that begin to materialize that separate. And this is where the big temptation is. And this is why we always have to be mindful and pay attention to our own weaknesses above the weaknesses of our brothers and sisters. The third problem, he says, is mental pride and consequent inability to work in group formation. The disciple must recognize talent and efforts of others in the group and make maximum use of them instead of just seeking to control all activity according to his own will. Okay, so when the disciple works in group formation, he must look for the talents that other people have and try to get them maximized so they're useful rather than just him being the center of everything. Okay, so we want to look in any group we're involved with to maximize the talents of others and just not seek to be the number one honcho yourself. There are certain times, he says, that the disciple must insist on a certain direction if it comes from the higher self. But overall, there are many avenues that can be explored by group members, and the fewest possible restrictions should be applied. So it's true that in group formation, we have to do everything we can to use all the talents in the group, but and also listen to the people in the group. But then there are certain times that if you're a leader of a group or in a group and you get something from your soul that you know is 100% right, there are certain times that you have to stand your ground, or else the whole group could wind up being on the wrong path. So sometimes the disciple must stand his ground. Now, the trouble is, sometimes people stand their ground when they're entirely in the wrong, and this creates a problem. But if you know you're in the right, then you have to stand your ground, but have to do it in a certain way that that doesn't override the freedoms and the participation of other people in the group. And you have to, diplomacy is a very important quality for the disciple to learn, because if you see you have an idea that is correct and other people are not seeing it, then influencing them in a positive way takes a lot of skill. And even if you're right, if you try to push your rightness on to people in a way that's abrasive, you can wind up destroying the whole endeavor. So DK set a good example. He started his groups, and there were certain things that he knew was right that he insisted be done. But on the other hand, he allowed the various students in his group maximum participation, and he often pointed out to members of the group, he said, like, you have this talent and you really need to develop it. And so he looked for talent of the various students in the group and discipleship in the New Age books, and he encouraged them to develop these talents. He talks about the inner and the outer schools are closer than realized, and one earnest student goes totally unrecognized. In the press of work and in the burden and toil of the day's labors, it is an encouragement to know that there are those who watch, that every loving deed, every aspiring thought, every unselfish reaction is noted and known. Bear in mind, however, that it comes to the recognition of the helpers through the increased vibration of the aspirant, and not a specific knowledge of the deed accomplished or the thought sent out. Those who teach are occupied with the principles of truth, with vibratory rates, and with the quality of the light to be seen. In other words, he tells us that when we as rank and file workers are endeavoring to do a work in the service of humanity, he says it's noted. But he says it's not noted in the way a lot of us think, that we have like God or an angel looking over our shoulder, taking note of everything we're doing. He says the masters, they pick up, they see the light, and they sense the vibration of you. If they're following you, they will sense your vibration. So they will have a sense of what you're doing and how valuable your work is. They will not know all the little details about everything that you're doing, but they'll have a sense of the value of what you're accomplishing. That's how they do it. Yeah, people think that a lot of Christians think that God's sitting up on a throne and he's watching them, every little thing they're doing, that he's really interested in whether or not they're knitting a sweater for their neighbor or whatever. And so can you imagine, as I wrote the other day, can you imagine you being God and just keeping track of 100 people that are praying to you regularly? Just think of keeping track of just 100 people, and then 1,000, then 1,000,000, then 7 billion, and then people on all kinds of other planets. They think that God is up there on a throne, just having all these things go through his mind. And if that were true, then our God would be a crazy God, because that would drive any consciousness crazy. But he tells us now he tells us the way the masters do it. They pick up a sense, a feeling about what's going on, and that's how they pay attention to us. They're very aware, but not aware in the way that we envision it from our lower self. He says the masters do not have time to pay attention to specific words and deeds, and the student needs to focus on the work to be done above obtaining some visit from on high. He says that will come only as needed. So I find this with many of my fellow ex-Mormons is that they all focused on getting some visit from God or an angel or something, Jesus showing up. And this is a really big focus for these guys, and a lot of other Christians same way. They think the ultimate is to get a visitation, he says, but what the disciple needs to focus on is the work to be done. This is often overlooked. Yeah, people focusing on getting, and a lot of New Age people, they're focused on meditation and getting connected to nirvana, and they don't get anything done. He says the important thing for the disciple above everything else is to get something done that serves humanity. Once you become a useful tool in the hands of the higher lives of the hierarchy, then you'll get their attention in the right way. Until then, the only attention you'll get will be thought forms that will lead you astray and give you wrong information. Information that sounds good, but no new principles, no new connection to higher purpose. Just like, yeah, I saw Jesus the other day and he told me to be good to my neighbor and whatever,
Bake
you
bread.
know. No new information, just I've seen Jesus, and so I know I'm saved now, and I'm on my path to the celestial realms. He says the masters are occupied in making knowers and masters out of everyday men and women, and we should copy this attitude of the masters. The masters want to take people like you and me and make them like themselves. And what a lot of people do when they achieve something is they say, I've achieved, but I don't want others to be able to duplicate what I've done because I want this all for glory all to myself. But this is the wrong attitude. This is the attitude of the left-hand path. The right-hand path is once something is achieved, once you've gone a certain place on the path, and there's other people behind you struggling to find that place, then it's your duty to help them and give them light so that they can navigate successfully to where you are. It says the masters teach the disciples to know themselves. He says, setting them free from authority by awakening interest and inquiry in their minds, and then indicating, not more than that, the direction in which the answer is to be sought. So this is what the higher lives do. They indicate the avenue where the answer is to be sought. And this is what our soul does to us.
Gives you hints.
Right. Right. And they give them the conditions which will force them to stand on their own feet and rely on their own souls and not on any human being, be he a beloved friend, teacher, or master of wisdom himself. Okay, so this is where what the masters are trying to do with people like you and me, get us to stand on our own feet so we can rely on our own souls and not have to say, hey, I need to talk to Dwal Cole to find out what I'm supposed to do. Okay, or I need to talk to Jesus, or I need to have Jesus come visit me and let me know that I'm really saved. Okay. This is the disciple must learn to stand on his own feet, on his own soul, because your higher self, your soul, is a master of wisdom in his own realm. Okay. So think of a master like the Christ or Dwell Cool or the Buddha, and then think of your soul. Your soul has access to everything the masters have access to. And so your soul is like a master on its own plane. So connecting to your soul is the important thing, because your soul is always there, because you are a reflection of your soul, and you're always linked to your own soul. And so it's always there waiting for you to make the connection. He tells us that by urging students to take note of the lessons taught in this book and apply them using their own initiative and intelligence, seeking for the good of the whole above the self, is the important point. So that's his closing advice. And his closing statement, I'll read the last quote in the book that I'm going to give from DK. He says this: "The urgency of the hour is upon us, and I call upon all of you whom I am seeking to help to join the strenuous effort of the great ones. They are working day and night in an effort to relieve humanity and to offset these evils and disasters which are imminent in the present situation. I offer you the opportunity. I tell you that you are needed, even the very least of you. And I assure you that groups of students working in unison and with deep, unfaltering love for each other can achieve significant results." I think that's a great finishing quote there. And he talks about how people are needed. He says, even the very least of you. Now, if you think you don't have much to offer because you don't have a lot of talent, he says, don't worry about it. He says you're still needed. There's still things that you can do. I like the little statement about for the want of a nail, the kingdom was lost type sequence. And for the want of the rank and file not doing their job, the new age could be lost. So each of us needs to think about what we can do to contribute to make the world a better place, to bring in the new age. There's something that everybody can do. And so I'll end this course with this statement, is that one of the best things we can contemplate is asking ourselves in our own progression, what is my next step? And what can I do to take it? And what can I do to make this world a better place? What can I do to make my associates' lives better, to make the world better, to make my community better, to make my nation better, to make the world better? Is there something I can do to contribute? And so that's the thought DK wants to leave with students as they finish this course. And so that pretty much wraps it up. Any questions or comments before we finish off here?
Well, I was going to say, he talks a lot about group work. If we could just keep our intention clear that it's important for us to link as a group and stay connected in spite of our weaknesses, our foibles, our personalities. I think that's the most important thing we can do, and we'll be fed as a group spiritual impulses or hints that will lead us to our next step. I've seen a lot of people come and go because they didn't really appreciate the value of group work. You know, they just wanted to dabble. So I think it's real important that people here today examine their intention and really stay linked consciously with each other here.
Yeah, and strengthening each other is important. And what we talked about earlier in praise is good. Look for good things to say about other people in the group. And if people feel appreciated, then they'll actually start looking for things to do to get more appreciation. So they will think, well, he really appreciated me doing this. So what else can I do to benefit the group or the person or whatever? So appreciation kind of is fertilizer that brings forth good works. So this is one thing he's really stressed a lot, is be very cautious about criticizing other group members. Look for the good things and praise those good things, and it makes the good multiply. Okay, course finished. We will start a new course next week. So we'll meet again next Sunday at 2 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time.
Well, I just want to say, Joe, that everybody here really appreciates all the effort that you put into these 100+ lessons that you've presented, and I think everyone here will acknowledge that they've benefited greatly from your service, and we want to acknowledge the great work that you've done in this course.
Well, hopefully I blended some fire and water, because this is the third time I've attempted to teach the course on white magic. The first two times I got about halfway done and then kind of fizzled out. This time I finally finished it, and it's took 104 classes altogether. So it's much more complete than anything I've ever attempted in the past. So
I think that's a
Well, it
milestone.
must be significant of something.
yeah. Well, you've been a good group. That really helps me as a teacher to have a good group that pays attention and focuses and appreciates. So that being said, we will see you next week.
Yay.
Bye, everyone.
Man, help us to do our part.
Yeah, right.